Next up for general business is opportunity for citizens to speak. Are there any citizens that would like to address the committee? Outside of our agenda items? Seeing none, moving on to our second order of business, which is action items. Approval of minutes from the May 2020 meeting. Looking for a motion. Thank you, Mrs. Voigt.
I move to approve the minutes as presented for our and executive session.
Excellent.
I'll second, please.
Second, thank you. Ms. Mantillo. Any discussion? None? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Moving on to the approval of the vouchers. Did we have any questions?
Nope, there were no questions. this month.
Questions. Alrighty, then I'll be looking for a motion. The approval of the vouchers.
So moved.
Thank you. A second? Thank you very much. Any discussion on the vouchers? Anybody see anything that they caught right before the meeting? Who was our second item? Mrs. Reincheck. Alrighty, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Our third action item would be the approval of Richardson School lease of Pleasant Hill site.
Yeah, last month, the committee, committee reviewed a 5-year proposal that had language of right of first refusal and some other things, and you asked me to come back with a stripped-down 3-year agreement. So that's what's before you today. Nothing financially has changed compared to the previous year, so I think we hit on all the things you wanted. The only early termination language in there now is if the tenant would buy another piece of district property, that we wouldn't hold them to this lease. But otherwise, it's, as you can see, we're down to one page. Yep. So if there's any questions, I can certainly answer them. This was run July 1st through 23.
Mr. Como.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Darren, this is the first year for the maintenance fund, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's essentially like a sinking fund for us, right? And how did you determine that amount? Is that just based on previous 3 years?
Yeah,
Expenses or?
And a desire to create the fund and get it up and rolling. It really started with the replacement of the parking lot discussion, which at some point needs to be done, like all of our parking lots, I guess. And we started out with a higher amount, but we're already incorporating just over 6% rent increase, not including the $10,000. So to me, it's it'll handle all the miscellaneous type of expenditures we may or may not encounter, and if we don't encounter any, then those dollars would roll forward. Just like actually we have with Express Swim at the South Pool, that's where the idea came up.
Okay, so the parking lot is on the list, or we did do it?
No, we still haven't addressed that. We're going to try to patch it a little longer. But at some point, it's going to have to be. But you're talking $250,000 to $300,000. If $250,000 if the soils are all good, and everything. Which haven't come across any of those yet, but I'm sure we'll eventually have one.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Questions? For a motion? Or do you have a question, or you're going to move for approval?
Just a quick.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I was glad to see the right of first refusal taken out. It simply didn't benefit the district at all.
No, and I responded. They said, well, why are you eliminating us from the pool of buyers? I said, I won't. I said, trust me, my board will ask me to send you an email. I said, we can't tie up a potential offer for 30 days while you debate whether you may or may not be interested. I said, the logistics don't even come close to working in our favor. So I think they got it. Said and done.
Any other questions? Excellent.
I will move to accept the Richardson lease of Pleasant Hill as presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Reincheck. And there's a second by Mrs. Voigt. Any other further discussion? Mr. Como.
Just real quick, I think they've been an excellent partner here, And I think they earned our trust, and that's why we're looking to roll this forward, so.
Great. All those in favor say, oh, yep, Mr. Clark.
I just want to make it
Okay.
clear, this committee has the authority over this lease, so we won't be having
Right.
this on the board agenda in case you wonder why it's not on there.
Right, okay. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you very much. Next on the agenda are our discussion information items, and we're switching it around a little bit, Darren?
If you don't mind, if we could do
Nope.
the referendum maintenance,
Yep.
because most of the people here are tied to that, rather than asking them to wait.
Yeah, for sure.
I will try to act. You have copies of the PowerPoint on your desk, too, if you want to along. So, with us tonight, we have Kate Egan, who's recently on the front page of the Freeman and a South alum. So I thought I should mention that.
Thanks,
Matt
Terry.
Settleman, who's been here before, Tim Williamson, and Kurt Wiebelhaus is here as well. So this is our key players, but some of our players on our construction team. And we wanted to come back to you tonight to go over, obviously with the shutdown of our schools, the schedule that we had in place quickly and continues to be shifted. So we wanted to outline what we're looking at now, go over the financials, and talk about we still have 3 elementary schools that we still have to get to in terms of secure entrances, talk about that timeline. And then I asked Tim to come in to talk about some of the district projects we're tackling during the shutdown as well. So, Kate, are you leading off, or?
I'll take the lead, Darren.
Oh, okay.
Is the sound working on this one? Good, okay. Awesome.
I'm not a Google person, so.
Top right.
That?
Awesome. I should start by confessing I'm not usually the most eager of public presenters, but it feels good to be in front of real people and having interactions. So
Oh, we're real.
thanks for having us. If you want to go ahead and jump to the next slide, Darren, I'll just kind of cover. We just want to run through an agenda. We've got some photos, hopefully some drone video that works to show some of the progress on the projects. Usually we're doing some board tours and getting into buildings, but obviously with the pandemic, we're kind of restricting that a little bit right now. Darren will talk about a budget update, and then Kate will share some of the planning work that's happening on the other elementary projects, and I believe Tim will speak to some of the projects he's managing here. So I'm going to jump into it, Darren. So Darren introduced Kate, myself, and Kurt. The other folks there are some of the leadership team that's been involved even prior to the referendum. So we just wanted to acknowledge them and skip one more. Kate and I felt it was important to include everybody else that's really kind of carrying the load for these projects, from the Findorf team working on site to Kate's team working through the construction and what's left of the design work here too. So a lot of hard work. It's been a great team to work with. So. Probably one of the things I'll try to highlight to you here is the last time we sat here, we weren't really even thinking about the impacts of the pandemic. Obviously, it's had a huge impact on society as a whole, especially schools, especially the work we're doing. So really, there's been a lot of struggles, obviously. I think the construction projects were probably a benefit in a lot of regards with this. Obviously, it allowed us a lot more access into the schools much earlier than we anticipated. As a result, it's condensed the project schedule and will reduce the amount of work that we're doing during the school year. So I think that's great for the impact on the buildings. It's also had a great impact on the budget and in cost savings. Reduce resources through the duration of the project, less temporary construction, things like that. So I think overall, we've still experienced some concerns with the supply chain, things like that, but thus far we've been able to work through them. Overall, I think these projects have benefited, and I would say of all the projects that Findorf is working in the K-12 market, the school district of Waukesha's projects have probably benefited the most, just from a standpoint, we were here and kind of poised to start work right around the spring break time, right when this first hit. And when the Safer at Home order came down, we were here mobilized, and within 3 days, we had ramped up crews and expanded the work. We had really mobilized quickly, which a lot of other districts, it takes a little more time to kind of ramp up to that. So it really enabled us to expand the work we were doing here in this first phase, and like I said, reducing what happens through the school year. So, jump one more, Darren. We'll jump in.
Ryan? Arrow's not, oh,
Morning. Oh. There you go. Horning Middle School is the one I wanted to start with, and I wanted to start here just to give you an illustration of how much this has freed up some work for us. If you remember, there's limited work that was going to happen at Horning Middle School until the end of the school year. So really, we shouldn't have been doing a whole lot before even tomorrow. And so here you can see a rendering at the front entry. If you want to jump ahead, Darren, you can see what it looks like today. I guess this was actually last week. There's a little bit more of that yellow board on. They'll start the EFS undercoat here next week. The site work is poised to start here, so this addition is going well. The interior work is really probably the most dramatic change. On the left-hand side there, that's inside the cafeteria. The right-hand side is what was and will be renovated science rooms. Doesn't look like much, but if you notice right in the bottom right-hand corner, there's some new concrete there. About 4 weeks ago, they had saw cut the floor and put in new underslab plumbing. That's a new block wall in the background, new drywall soffit, new ductwork, all that. So, really enabled us to get a big jump start on the work here. As a result, if you recall at Horning, the plan for this summer was to do the center core of the building and then work on the perimeter classrooms in a series of 3 or 4 classrooms through the school year, creating temporary classrooms in the auxiliary gym. As a result of this extra time, we're actually doing the center core and the perimeter classrooms. There won't be a need for those temporary classrooms. So again, a cost savings and then less impact to students. So things have trended well. Suspense.
huh.
Just a couple more pictures. On the right-hand side, that's one of the perimeter classrooms that I talked about. So there's already interior paint happening. There's a drywall soffit that accommodates the new ductwork into the room. Well, like I said, none of that was really planned. The photo on the left is actually looking into the kitchen. So to set some perspective, they should have been having school lunch there today. So we've got it demoed out and getting ready to put the new kitchen in here this summer. So, Butler Middle School. So again, just a brief reminder here is at this school a little bit more of an extensive addition, some intense renovations throughout the building, and then reconfiguring the site. Probably the most challenging part of this project is the last bullet point there. It's replacing the heating and cooling system throughout the building. And so if you want to jump into some of those photos, Darren, there's a rendering from what the exterior looks like. And I'm going to jump to the next one. Hopefully the drone video will work here. All right. So this was shot last Monday, actually, but you can see the site work happening there in the foreground. Once it pans around, the foundations are nearly complete here. There's a lot of site utility work that's been installed, so hopefully we get some dry weather, and then they'll start to reconfigure the new site.
You're not looking for rain right now.
It's coming up.
So it's hard to see, but there's rooftop curbs for the new rooftop equipment that'll service the HVAC system. Those are cut in. The re-roofing will start later in July. Really allowed us to kind of get a jump start.
Matt mentioned, one thing we're liking about the schedule now is the reduced impact on the instructional year, but imagine, and that's inside with, not the temporary classroom at Horning, et cetera, but imagine this with 800 kids coming and going. See why we entered into the Blair conversations, but we're dodge a lot of the, logistical problems around the building with this.
Here's just some stills from that drone video. And there you can see the actual site. So you can see the foundation walls nearly complete there. In about 2 weeks, they'll be setting the precast floor for the second floor of that addition. And a bit closer on the right there is the grand staircase. So that wall was out there today. That wall's stripped, and then they'll start building the seat walls and the stairs up to the new front entrance. And this is inside. Again, for some perspective, this is the new media center up on the top floor on the east side. Had school been in place, this was Principal Sadowski's office. So looks a little bit different today. Again, here's a couple of shots. This is in the cafeteria. So on the left where you see that radius soffit, that is the entrance to the new student services suite. And then on the right are the two new openings that go into the auditorium. This is one team member that wasn't on the previous slide. He just started today. Camden Glazer, he's a senior at Waukesha North. He's a youth apprentice working with Findorf here for the next year. So today was his first day. He's actually an alum of Butler Middle School. And so I was upstairs. He was setting door frames already this afternoon. So he's off and running. We're excited to have him. South High School. There's two additions here on the front of the building, and then a science lab addition, some interior renovation work, and then adding cooling to a lot of the areas. And there's a rendering to remind you of what it's supposed to look like, right, Kate?
I drove by on the way here. It looks great. The brick's up.
This is the Roberta side of
Correct.
South, if you're not familiar.
Brick's up.
So this photo is actually 5 or 6 days old already, but this is that same kind of orientation from Roberta. The brick is actually completed on this elevation now. They're working on the brick on the science addition. And so on the right-hand side, that is inside of that addition that we just looked at. On the left-hand side, again, that's actually was the administration office at the school. So demolition's well underway there, and that'll be new classrooms here for the fall semester.
What do you have the tubes for?
That's actually exhaust for the negative air for the asbestos abatement. Les Paul Middle School, so again, significant addition here with the cafeteria, new secure entrance and administration, some renovations scattered around to accommodate ADA accessibilities, and then replacing the heating and ventilating systems. And so this is the view from Carroll Street. So if you were kind of by the library or just on the north side, this is the new cafeteria in the foreground. Get another drone video of this one to kind of see a outer perspective. Again, this was shot last week Monday or Tuesday. You can kind of see the outline of the foundations. Again, foundations are 95% complete here. You can see some masons working on the scaffolding up against where the new addition will be. That scaffold today was already down to the corner, starting to take shape there. And the parking lot on the right, that'll all get reconfigured here this summer. Interior, there's been quite a bit of work going on. I believe this photo is some of the locker room areas. So, again, quite a jump start with school, with the safer at home orders, letting the crews get in. If you want to keep up with progress, we do post these executive summaries. They're on the district website. They're translated to Spanish too, so keep an eye out for those. Those will be some weekly photos too, so you get to see what's going on.
If it every week during your Friday updates too, so.
Yeah.
I was waiting for the committee to see him before. So just an update on where we've, part of it's where we've been, but where we think we're heading. So all these numbers you're looking at are as of today, and some pieces of information that we don't have yet. And one of those is how much are we saving with the accelerated schedule. We know things like at Horning with no temporary classrooms, very measurable. But in August, sometime in August, we should be able to come back with a pretty firm number. And we do think it's going to be a sizable amount of money. We're losing some money on the interest side, earnings-wise, because we're spending it quicker, but overall, certainly we're ahead of where we've been. So the 2019 security projects, that's a known number. That was last summer's work, so that was just shy of 4.4 million. We have a placeholder right now for Hawthorne, Hillcrest, and Whittier of $2.6 million. Some of that money, and we'll talk about on the revenue side too, our original plan was to use $1 million of fund balance, and that has not come to the board yet for action and would need your approval before we could proceed. And we'll need to know that, well, we'll get into the timeline, but we'd need to know that probably by the end of summer-ish. And then the middle schools right now and south, we're looking at basically $60 million for a total expense budget as it stands today of $67 million. Not trying to be dramatic with the revenue side here. So here we go. We've talked all along about, this is a multifaceted approach to financing this thing. Obviously, the referendum is the biggest piece of that, $60 million. We had the safety grant early on of $343,000. We're doing major cafeteria work at all three middle schools for a tune of food services share of $1.2 million. Interest earnings, we're battling two things. We have a more accelerated drawdown schedule because of the construction. It has moved up, but also interest rates. Now, we had invested in CDs when this all started, and I wish those rates were carrying through, but you did short-term CD investments because you had to match up with your spend down. The renewal on those CDs, I don't know if it's worth the paperwork at this point to even lock it up because the rates have fallen so much. So that interest revenue budget once was $1.5 billion when we started, and we have reduced it down to $1.1 million, and it could be $1 million before it's all said and done. But we are managing our expense side and on the revenue side, and we're not going to end up in way short because we never took that into account when we developed the scope of work to be completed. We are doing some projects that Tim's overseeing or the contracts held by us. Probably the biggest example of that is the roof work at the middle schools. We're trying to have a turnkey project where when we leave, those buildings are set. We're not leaving a 20-year-old roof with all those improvements underneath it. So $2.8 million there. And then, as I mentioned before, district fund balance, and this was always tied to Hawthorne, but I look at this as just a big pool of money, and that's just one of the funding sources for it. But that has yet to be approved, and we'll be bringing forth plans for your consideration. So as it stands, and I'll stress today, this is where we are. Right now, I would say if someone was to ask me on the street, where are we? We're $500,000 in the hole, and there's a few asterisks here that you really need to take into consideration. The net position, the negative $500,000, makes the assumption that every dollar that we spend in our contingencies right now, which is just over $1 million, are expended during the course of the projects. Obviously, we hope that's not the case, and usually it's not the case, but as soon as I utter those words, things can happen. The expense budget does not figure in the full savings from the accelerated construction schedule. Those numbers will be known in August. You know, we think we have an idea of where those savings are going, and I think those savings will make this picture look a lot more even. But we don't know what's the COVID impact. We're getting a better idea of the supply chain impact, I think, at this point. But there's some unknowns, so we don't want to roll out a number of accelerated savings when there's some things we simply don't have control over. And then the Whittier, Hawthorne, and Hillcrest number is simply a placeholder at this time. We've got some preliminary designs. Findorf's done some kind of square footage type costing, but it's certainly not been finalized in design or finalized in the efficiency of work hasn't been in place. So again, as of today, I would say that's our position, but I also think we have 3 strong variables there that'll make us come in budgets. That's why I don't mind sharing this number, because I think we're pretty confident as a team that it won't be a concern, hopefully by August even. Questions on the?
Corey?
Well, who's the best person? Yes, but I'll let someone who.
I'll take that. So contingency it can result in change orders, but it's really an earmark of money for the unknown. So, and it really is that. It's the unknown, and there's inevitable things. But the Butler site has posed some challenges. Les Paul's a very old building, so there's sort of those unforeseen conditions that are going to have a cost. And so we forecast some dollars for them, knowing that it's an inevitable part of construction that you need to forecast for it.
Requested, go ahead.
A change order would be yes. A contingency is a budget that we've mutually set, and we're holding that. And so kind of between Darren, myself, Kate, and Kurt, we work to forecast how that's being spent and where.
The change orders, which we have not had many at all, the process is it's identified. Findorf develops a cost to it. We have Bray look at it to see if it works. Kurt is our owner's rep, approves it. Tim takes a look at it, and then it comes to me, and I sign off on any change order. But we've stayed very tight to scope. I think the most significant change orders were more surprises and taking advantage of you're in the ground or you've cut into the concrete. This is the time to do something. It's not, hey, how about we do these 3 classrooms too, or let's put skylights in where we didn't ask for them or plan for them.
You have another question?
Yeah, I'm getting some questions from constituents and my daughter, Butler next year. Any idea if the progress there is going to alleviate the need for Blair? My guess, I think, was no, but.
I can tell you that I've been pushing that question, and I pushed it for a good solid month, right? Every time we get together, I'm waiting to hear how we're not going to have to use Blair. We just couldn't get to that point where we could definitely say that we didn't need Blair. So we are fully anticipating the use of Blair for next school year, because you didn't want to overpromise, because we're prepping Blair while all this is going on. So no, I think we got very closer than we ever imagined, certainly, when we decided to use Blair, but this wasn't the safe decision to make.
Fair enough. So it's not a possibility. It's off the table at this point?
No.
Okay.
I think the only question, and I'll just throw this out there for food of thought, is at semester, what do you do? Because at semester we might, but everyone's kind of comfortable into the school year by then. So I don't know if that's a great idea, but it's something we can, I think, probably safely talk about and decide whether that's a sound solution, or do you just let the school year play out? So you have several months to, as a board member and father, to think about that.
Thank you.
Could you take a vote from the faculty and the kids and the students, just asking?
I think we would open it up to, if we're okay with it as a construction team, opening it up to Jason and staff to see, but at that point, there'll be some work yet to be done at Butler, but it would be very minimal, so I guess we don't, now Tim would have to, well, I guess it would all be new furniture coming to Butler, so it's certain we can knock around and talk about the process to make that final decision.
Want me to go on this one?
Yeah, if you don't,
Sure.
well, I can, but.
Yep. So the remaining 3 elementary schools, Hawthorne, Hillcrest, and Whittier, from the very beginning, we have the dates for planning for these 3 schools. It started in November with the successful referendum. We've always been looking at, secure entries for all of the district schools. These 3 have exterior components to them. They're more complicated. They have grade changes in them. So we've been looking at concepts for these, but they had multiple concepts. The 11 secure entries that happened last summer had less options. So that's why we felt more comfortable going with those right away. So that's one of the reasons why these 3 remain. It's not just about security, it's about accessibility and also looking at the options.
Yeah, I have gotten this question, and just again recently gotten asked that. If you recall, when we had our first summer, our goal was we passed the referendum in November, and bid documents had to go out in end of January.
March.
Oh, it was March. So we got as many that we knew we could sign off on with good designs and pushed them out the door. And we actually did many more schools than we had planned. Originally, we had talked about, well, maybe it's 6 and 6, and do 6 in year 1 and 6 in or so year 3. But we did so many in the first year. But we've never forgotten these 3, and we continue to talk about them, whether it's scope of work or budget-wise. So in case you're asked the question, we're just ahead of where we thought we'd be. If these were easier ones, Hawthorne has not been an easy school to work with because of all the different levels, and so each one of these had a uniqueness to it that made it where you just couldn't turn it around in 2019.
Yeah, so as we continue to look at each of them and look at the options, Hawthorne especially, we had tried to add the elevator to the interior of the building, and the floor slab didn't support that. So then we looked at options on the exterior, which is the concept we're holding now. Each building, as we had time to look into it, and now as we're able to talk to the principals. So we have meetings with the principals scheduled on June 23rd, because again, we have a couple of options. So looking at both the scope and the budget, to, as Darren said, if you're in some of the schools, is there an efficiency to address some of the accessibility components? So we're trying to look at the buildings as full picture, but also working within the budget to get that secure entry piece. So that's the planning that we've been doing. So as Darren said, we talk about these regularly at our core planning team meetings. We had talked about doing construction documents for them this spring, but decided to hit pause on that because, as Darren said, we would probably issue these for construction documents in March of 2021. And so we, with the unknown of COVID and the schedule changes and budget, we didn't need to rush the design. So that's why we purposely hit pause so that we could have some of these things flush out and have better information going into design for these. So we've been doing schematic design all along, but in the fall, we'll go into construction documents and then bid in early 2021 with a groundbreaking goal of March. So summer of 2021.
Also at, just to give you an idea of some of the delay, Hillcrest, once we got into it, if you guys are familiar with Hillcrest, I guess what the main entrance is, used to be a side entrance, and you walk in and there's the custodial closet here and there's the office door here and the hallway's about this wide. We started talking about, well, should we return the office to where it was originally in the center of the building? And one of the reasons we really wanted to identify where that should go is we want to do the parking lot at that school, but we don't want to do the parking lot until we know where's the main entrance going to be, what should that flow be. So that was kind of the thinking of, again, Hawthorne's complex in and of itself, but again, of why we've waited, in case you're asked, because it's a legitimate question, I think, for a parent to ask. I voted for this 3 years ago and I haven't seen anything yet, so we're on our way. It's funny that the boardroom has the worst Wi-Fi of any. You think so? Oops. Tim, you want to walk us through?
Sure. So we were able to kickstart quite a bit of work ahead, and a lot with referendum dollars and with some help from Darren and the current CIP budget. We ramped a lot of things up to try to do a lot of things to get ahead of the schedule. So we have 2 years ago, we did the roofing study. We've got a lot of roofing we've got to get caught up on. So we're doing some roofing at Banting, Butler, Horning, Les Paul, South. Really, a lot of the areas that we're redoing the big renovations, we're doing a whole new roof over that renovation area. So it's done. So we don't have a roof leak in a suite that we just remodeled and did all the work on. Banting is a tougher one. That has I think it's called a phenolic insulation, where if it gets wet, it's known to actually eat the steel decking that it sits on. It was used a lot in the past. I think it was just because it was cheap. So that section of roof we're getting rid of this year. Knowing my luck, if I didn't, it would have a leak and everything else. So kind of like the same situation we had last year at West in the auditorium mechanical room, where it leaked so long that the deck actually eroded away and you could see the insulation. I didn't want to have that on a whole section of roof at Banting. So another one we found during the school year is that the hot water system at West, which is original, the water tank itself started leaking. So it's one of those, it's leaking, you don't touch it, because the minute you touch it, it's just going to deluge. So we got in and replaced all that. We had to replace valves, piping. We actually found that they ran from the boilers. When you blow down a boiler, that water comes out at 160 degrees. They ran it into regular PVC, which has a 130 degree rating. So we had to saw cut the slab and replace a lot of piping that was all warped and wasn't working properly. So we got into that, and then it was, well, if we're cutting the floor up, in order to do the floor, I got to get boilers out of the way. So then we started replacing boilers. As we know, I think last year when I told you that the boilers at West needed to be retubed, and it was $180,000 just to retube the boilers. So now we're replacing the boilers, because it's kind of like fixing your furnace at home. You're going to do the blower motor, then you're going to do this, and you do that. So it was kind of a perfect time to just get in and done and be out of that zone. We also moved up a lot of painting projects. So Bethesda, Hawthorne, Higher, Lowell, Rose Glen, White Rock. A lot of hallways, classrooms. Lowell's, we're going to repaint their gym. Getting caught up on all that. Using basically all of our in-house staff, custodians and maintenance crew to go and create painting teams and just start painting those schools out. Oh, that was quick.
Or nothing.
We have another one before that, don't we?
No, it's a lot of projects.
So the water softeners, what we found is the city of Waukesha required us to do a water softener test. So we had to pay $10 a water softener to get it tested to find out if the water softeners were running properly. And what we found at all those schools is that they weren't working at all. So we are now in the process of getting all of that corrected. And another one we're getting caught up on is a lot of asphalt and concrete work. We've got cracked sidewalks, sunk sidewalks, asphalt that's failing. So if you've been over to Higher, you know that front sidewalk drop off, that asphalt is shot. The apron going out of the exit is shot. So we're replacing all that sidewalk. The north lot at Summit View was cracking and falling apart up on the high side. So we're replacing that. We're actually putting in a concrete pad, so when the dumpster truck picks up the dumpsters, it doesn't crumble the asphalt underneath it. So fixing a lot of those things now. And like I said, sidewalk sections here and there. We had the low spot at Prairie, which, as far as I know, has been there for quite a while, where it's right where the drop-off is, where you go into the playground, it freezes and ices up, and you get a salted and doesn't do anything because it sits 3 inches lower. So we got all that squared away. So a lot of those trip hazards, things of that nature. And then we're also helping MEP-wise assist with all of the referendum projects. So as far as moving the construction ahead at getting classroom stuff out and moving furniture around the schools. We did a lot of that earlier so that Findorf could really get in there and go.
I should mention that our HVAC staff has really helped out. I mean, you're big enough we're big enough that you have skilled trades, but the feedback and advice in the designing of what we're doing, HVAC and electricians and the plumbers, has really been pretty priceless to our process as a construction team. So a shout out to them, and I don't know how many hours that adds up to, but it's been a significant part of their day as well.
Thank you. Mr. Williamson, you mentioned the north lot at Summit View.
Yep.
I know Garrett Chesky and the PTO presidents have been talking for many years about trying to figure out the parking issues there. Are you working with them to try to work with angle parking?
We
and all
worked,
that?
we worked some stuff out this past summer in far as striping, so we'll keep working on that plan, but there's only so much you can do within the space that we have. So we did meet with the PTO and Garrett last year and created some other drop-off spots or quick drop-off spots for them, so they're aware of that. Yep.
Thank you.
The pool maintenance south, Blaine loves this one because that's his area, right? There was a lot of things that needed to get done. We're working on the bleachers, getting those replaced, but a lot of the pool pumps, the control motors and stuff were starting to fail and go bad, so we've got ahead of all of that. We've moved up some of the replacing valves. We're actually doing an epoxy pool floor on the deck. So even where the epoxy was around the tile and the tile up to the pool, we're going to epoxy the whole thing. What happens over time is the pool water will eat the grout, and then eventually you got to continue to regrout it, or the tiles start breaking loose and coming loose, and you're patching tile. And so we're going to do epoxy the whole thing. So that's going to be about a 3 to 4 week process with cure time. So we went up and looked at Grafton's pool, and that's what they did. It's very slip resistant, and you don't have to do anything maintenance-wise to it, but just basically holds it down. So I got one of our electricians looking at doing a lighting study for the whole district to go with our new light fixtures, our new LEDs, which we can tie back into a control system, so you can program those lights to turn on, turn off. If you run them down the hallway, you can set them so that when somebody walks down the hall, certain lights will turn on ahead of them, or they'll turn off after a certain period of time, so you don't have to worry about lights being left on and all that kind of stuff. So we're looking at doing that district-wide and focus on what schools should have it first, calculate the savings to see which ones we can kick off the following year and keep building on that electrical savings. Doing some stuff over at North in the tech ed area, dropping some hoods down for the welding. They moved one of their plasma cutters, so we're rechanging some of that stuff up for them. And then, as you know, last year we had to pay the $144,000 for the Siemens upgrade to the HVAC controls. We are going with a Tritium Niagara, which is an open shop system. We can work on it ourselves. We can pull our own cables. We can do all of our own stuff. So we're kicking that off at Hillcrest and Butler's part of the referendum. But that's something that we're going to start taking internally, pulling our own cables, setting our own devices, doing our own programming, instead of having to consistently pay a third party to come in and do that and be proprietary to them. So we're going to start taking that over. So our staff has really stepped up during this time, not only with the disinfecting and the sanitizing, but really taking it by the shorts and really getting ahead of everything as far as grass cutting. We didn't bring any seasonals back. We're doing all of that this year with internal people, cutting grass, maintenance, lawn care, all that kind of stuff. So a kudos to all of them for really stepping up and only helping in the moving the construction stuff ahead, so.
Generally, when we have these conversations where we're adding projects, we come back with a report to F&F, but when especially the south pool and the west boiler work, we saw the opportunity and we just went with it because we were never going to, well, you wouldn't think we'd ever have all this time with empty buildings. So might have broke protocol. Hopefully you understand the rationale behind that, because we simply can't wait for the meeting cycles to always occur. And I hopefully you approve the thought process that went into signing off on those two projects. The south pool in general, I mean, Blaine would obviously love to be in that south pool a lot more than he is right now. But I think even they would agree that this was the time to get in there, and hopefully we don't have to be back for a while. So.
So, Tim, the maintenance people that are able to do the lawns and all of the things that we would have sourced out, is that because they weren't in the schools, cleaning the schools after the kids were there? Like, we were able to employ them?
Yeah,
and
a lot of it has to do, we started our summer cleaning, basically, that was on the 15th or 16th. We started deep cleaning and pulling rooms apart and started getting into that process. And then when we closed school for the remainder of the year, then we really kicked it into high gear. So we started our summer cleaning before summer. So we got caught up on a lot of that, so I was able to pull custodial staff out of the schools and put them in painting crews or have them go cut grass or have them go do those other things where they would have been tied up in that school. And, we don't have summer school, so they're not supporting that. So we're getting caught up on a lot of stuff, so I didn't have to bring in any extra help.
Yeah, our goal was to keep our full-timers working, and there's plenty to do with 20-some sites, so.
So then the money that we save from that, where does that go? Into Tim's budget or?
I'd love that. Thank you.
I'm just,
All right.
It's not that, well, in my mind, it went into the work at South Pool, it went into the work at the West Boiler Room. That's where those savings and dollars, because when you get to the end of the year, you kind of cobble together to do a few projects if you can, and to me, that's one of the pieces that allowed us to do the work we're doing.
I'm sure part of that,
Back to, Tim gets it in the form of a new floor on the South Pool or deck, and the boilers that West will be much more energy efficient and operating effectively, so.
so we moved up like Hires asphalt and concrete. We moved up Summit View to try to get ahead. Hillcrest, we all know is bad, but again, we weren't going to touch that until we figured out what to do with the entrance, because you do one, you're going to do the other one, because you're changing the flow of traffic in that school, and the way it's set up now would not work if you move the offices to the west side of center of the school. So it's trying to get caught up on all of the other ones. Yeah, I believe that was the last one.
The last one was questions. So, any other questions that you want us to? We'll probably not come back in July. Our next one will probably be an August report. With that, hopefully it's in early August, so we'll have a better idea of the accelerated schedule savings that we're generating and a better financial picture. Because again, that was as of today, and we just have some unknowns out there on the positive side. So.
Thank you.
Phone shots on the website.
All good stuff, all exciting.
Okay, thank you. And hopefully they'll move you up.
Every few months I have to
thank you.
Encouraging them, it's like,
guy over there that keeps giving me the. Get there.
The monthly budget report.
okay. Well, it's an interesting year for budget with everything going on, to say the least. So I took the perspective this month. It's really, doesn't really work to compare it to last year at all at this point. So I took the perspective more of looking at, in each category, where do we think we're going to end up at this point? And so these aren't cut in stone yet. These are just my estimates looking at what we're expecting to collect and what we're expecting to expend. So I'll just kind of quickly go through the different categories. In our local sources, we're going to be short on interest because it tanked, and it's coming in well below budget, and school fees and textbooks. And so I'm looking at our local sources for revenue being down about $575,000 under what we budgeted for. The good news is that in the next category, which is basically our intermediate sources and interdistrict sources, our open enrollment numbers are coming out good again. Each year we budget conservatively on open enrollment because it's such an unknown, and this year we had a good amount, and it's pretty set at this point, and it's looking like we'll have about $715,000 surplus, which is going to help offset that loss of revenue in the local sources. For state sources, we had a couple extra grants that we weren't expecting, and the state tuition claim is one of those things where there's a pool of money. State tuition claims is what it costs we get reimbursed for what it costs to educate students that have been incarcerated. And at the end of the year, we file a claim. There's one big pot of money, and depending how many claims are filed throughout the year, you get a certain amount of money back. And this year we got all of it, so that was higher than expected. So in this category, we're about $115,000 above right now, or with more revenue than we expected. Federal sources, we had another Medicaid cost settlement that was more than we had anticipated. That's always it's hard to predict that one. And so we like to, again, budget conservatively so we don't end up under, but we ended up with a payment that was much higher than we had expected. And so I'm looking at potentially another $374,000 surplus in federal sources. The only revenue in the other revenues last month was a P-card rebate. So overall, we are looking at potentially a little over $600,000 surplus of revenue than we expected going into this year, which is good. But again, all of this is up in the air, and we're still waiting for, and we'll have to review what we can do with any surpluses, because too much of a surplus isn't always a good thing because it can impact your aid. So there's a lot of things we're going to have to be looking at this next month to determine what are we going to do if we do end up with larger surpluses. So going on to expenses, right now our salary and benefits combined, we're looking at about $2.5 million under budget from where we were at with salaries and benefits. A lot of that is the furlough. Purchase services, right now we're underspending, but that one there's a lot of project work, so I don't expect that one to come out quite as low. We have a lot of project work and some IT work, but again, we had much lower transportation costs in this area because of the first student contracts. And employee travel costs were way down because a lot of conferences and things come in June that they go to after school is over. So non-capital objects, when you look at the budget, it looks like we've got quite a surplus there, but that is mainly where our sites end up with their surplus, and so that'll be used for carryover, so it doesn't really contribute to the surplus because our sites do get carryover on any unexpended money that they have. Capital objects, mainly it's what's left in there, I think, is IT, if I remember right. And yes, it's technology, so they usually spend at the end of the year to buy technology for the next year, so I don't expect there to be a real surplus in capital. Debt retirement, we really don't retire debt out of Fund 10. It's always at a 38 and 39, so no impact there. Insurance and judgments, it shows that we're way over budget on this one, and we expect to be over budget because unemployment falls in under here. And boy, the May claims that we're seeing come through now to be paid in June are significant. And so a lot of our surplus is going to be, a good part of our surplus will be taken up helping to cover the unemployment costs that we have to absorb. Transfers, we had no transfers in May, and overall, we'll be back in July with more finalized numbers and looking at some recommendations. What do we do with any money that is a surplus? Fund 27, is pretty quick. Mainly, it's we're showing a shortfall about $200,000 in revenue, and that's mainly our special education categorical aid came in a little bit less. The expenditures we've got a surplus for our salaries and benefits. Everything else is, purchase services will have a savings also because of, again, transportation. Everything else is pretty much grant related, and I don't expect there to be any surpluses, or if there are surpluses, they are carried over. The grants they're giving us a little extra leeway this year on carryover. So some of them that might not have had carryover, we're going to have some carryover on. But we expect to see a surplus in Fund 27 at the end, but again, that'll just be offset by a lower transfer from Fund 10 to cover the expenditures. Fund 43, I think you got all the info you need from Darren's report. The referendum projects are chugging along, and that's pretty much all of our spending is. With that, our only revenue in May was interest, and it's, again, much lower than we had hoped it to be, but it is where it is. Any questions on that information or additional budget information? Otherwise, I want to talk a little bit about our self-funded items. But Yes.
There was a note on our calendar for the budget that May 1st to 31st was review of employee compensation. If we decided to put that off, as we had talked about, because of the unknown for next year.
Actually, I have a budget development agenda item right after this, and we'll touch on it.
Okay. I know.
I haven't looked at that calendar much.
Yeah, and actually, the calendar was supposed to go with the next one, so I apologize, with the budget update one. If it got put in here, I apologize.
No, I pulled it from before, so.
Okay.
You have something, Corey?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Regarding expenses, the furlough that you mentioned and the salaries and benefits under budget, I think 2.5. Some months ago, we tried to quantify the cost of not doing those furloughs. The initial guesstimate was 1.2 million, and I think it went up to 1.8. Is that still holding true? And if you take the 2.5 less the 400,000, does that net back out to roughly what we were talking about?
It's a little bit higher because I think when the original estimates that I provided didn't include like savings on substitute costs, and toward the end of the year, there's a significant amount of subs because of field trips and different things that have to get covered. And so it didn't include substitutes. It also didn't include teacher hourly. There ends up being a lot of work in June for curriculum and other type of teacher hourly, and I did not take that into consideration when we were looking at the amount of the furlough. So the salaries are coming out higher than the original projection because some of these one-off things that we're seeing savings on that I hadn't personally thought about.
Yeah, when we talked about that furlough, it was strictly looking at the aid line item and coming up with a net number, because at that time, we didn't know if we'd be back in mid-May or whatever, but obviously, we didn't come back, so.
Sounds good, thank you.
Voight.
Do any of the surpluses that we have offset some of the budget reductions that we were planning for 2021?
That's what we'll be looking at for next year, is what is the right thing to do? Because, a couple schools have thought there are things that will impact our aid. So we want to be very conscientious on how much extra money we surplus into next year. There's other things like looking at putting money into Fund 46, things like that help offset the aid impact. I don't even know if I should mention this, Darren's probably going to reach over and slap me, but there's also there's always rumblings out there that when you have too much fund balance, when times start to get tough, people start looking at, well, the schools have too much fund balance. So you have to balance having a healthy fund balance without having too much of a fund balance.
And we also have no idea what our funding is for next year. That's the biggest. I can tell you what our expense structure, a fair degree of accuracy. If I know what instructional program we're running, I can really tell you what our costs are. But not knowing the revenue side right now and what that budget repair bill may or may not, it might never happen, that's the hardest part right now in terms of where's our position. And we'll, again, the next agenda item, we walk through all of that, so.
Mr. Como.
So I'm trying to maybe understand what reports might be looking like, where we usually come to the end of the year and we say, hey, we had a great year, we didn't have a great year, and we're going to roll this into our fund balance, and these are the areas. And we have our fund balance report during our audit, right, and all that. So is there a way we can kind of have a COVID-19 impact, or at least be able to identify within each fund, essentially, this is due to COVID-19, easily, so we can see it, and then we can have like a roll-up saying, here's the COVID-19, because we're not going to have one, there's no way you have one fund, so, it impacts everything. So how do we get the big, I guess my question is, how do we get the big picture of the COVID-19 impact when we're looking at your reports? Will that be an easy thing for you to do or not?
What I'm envisioning, and not to keep bringing up the next agenda item, but we kind of, in theory, look at this and how it's going to roll out. But I think in July, Sherry and I will be able to come back and say, not every dollar saved in the A line budget is because of the furlough, but probably 99% of it is. So we can draw some base theories and come up with that pool of money. Because as we've talked about in the past, our goal is to conserve as much this year to help us get through the next two. And to do that, we'll have to, because the board, we'll have to identify what that pool of money is. And in my mind, the board should consider setting aside those dollars within fund balance, whether it's restricted or whatever the
Reserved,
proper or reserved definition we use, and then show that number going forward the next couple of years as we spend down those dollars. I don't think these dollars that we're saving this year, in my mind, and I love fund balance because it's financial strength, but the dollars that we're going to be looking at are so big, I don't think we can look at it in that same lens of, well, we'll set this aside for emergency. I really think it's how do we get through the next two fiscal years, and hopefully the economy's back to a level of strength after that time. So, but again, we go through it kind of.
So you think you have a way of being able to kind of keep track of that without muddying the waters of what we normally go through?
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, that pool of money is going to come from transportation savings, a very measurable number, and aid savings, and to a less, probably teacher hourly too, because that's probably pretty sizable. I mean, there's 3 or 4 line items we can go right to now and say, it's at least this. I don't know how much minutia we want to get into, but in terms of like a small elementary school's site budget was underspent $10,000 or whatever, but it's very calculable. And then we can say, okay, here's this pool of money. What do we want to do as a board to go forward?
I'm concerned that we're going to, we've never been through this, so this is going to muddy the waters. And so as we have to sit here and make decisions, try and help to clarify COVID-19 versus non-COVID-19. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Impact?
And not only make decisions, but have conversations with people. Because at the end of this fiscal year, our financial statements are going to be the strongest they've ever been.
Right.
And it's a slide coming up. But it's not really a tale of the story. It's a snapshot in time. Just like the construction budget being under right now, it is, if you were to ask me, plus, this minus this is this. But it doesn't tell the story. Just like at the end of this fiscal year, we're going to look great heading into a budget repair bill and a $3 million structural deficit and all the things that don't get footnoted in your financial statements. So you have to be ready to answer those questions from the community, whether it's staff or your neighbors over the fence or whatever. So it's going to cloud and all. The beauty of school finance is it's very linear. You can compare one year to the next, and there's a relationship, and it's very steady. That's not going to happen this year. Or next year when we use some fund balance potentially. That year is going to look kind of funny again, too. So it is going to be different.
Franchek.
Thank you. Darren, so I am having those conversations, or I'm being asked those questions, and so when you're saying what's coming in the next 2 years, the budget repair bill and what else? What is coming that we're trying to prepare for?
Budget repair bill and our structural deficit that we face every year now. Those are the two things we're facing now. We're getting a little more on the revenue side, getting a little more information on the federal funding part of it. It's a sizable amount of money, but it isn't, when you're as big as we are. But the biggest fear we should have is the budget repair bill. In my mind at this point. I don't know if Todd would agree with me or not, but take 25% of a fiscal year out of a government, 25% of sales taxes and earnings, and that's a huge hit. So
it's a state budget repair bill.
Yes.
It's the blow up school district bill.
Yes.
If you recall, in 2009 or 10, a week before we were to certify the levy, we got a $4 million reduction in state aid. Now, we were able to make that up with property taxes, but didn't make too many people happy.
Right.
My thinking is that's where the money is in the state, is in the general aid. they'll cut that, but they don't want to see property taxes going up, so they'll cut the per pupil expenditure. And the only way we can make that up is through dollars outside of the revenue control, and that's pretty hard to do.
So I guess that's a good summary of what I'm trying to accomplish, is put the board in a position where you can repair our budget after the budget repair bill. Kind of what we're envisioning.
So what is our projected surplus right now?
Didn't want to quantify it because there's still so many, I just was kind of looking at each individual category, but I didn't put together here's a number because I don't want to wrap around and grasp onto that number when we still have some unknowns to it.
Just today, I mean, the Medicaid reimbursement, the feds either send you one check a year or you get that year where you get 12 checks, and you're not exactly sure why, but we got a $250,000 check from some past year from the feds for Medicaid reimbursement, where that would have thrown our projection off $250,000 with one piece of mail. But
And the week before, we got a $250,000 check from them for another year's reimbursement. We had $400,000 budgeted
it's
this year.
the craziest thing
So.
you ever seen.
No, I'm just talking about, say, for instance, the furlough. How much are we saving on that?
I would guesstimate, once you net out the unemployment, and I think the one caveat I'd put on this, and I don't mean to have a caveat with everything, but that's just the world we're living in right now. Workforce development still has not defined whether our aides will be able to go into the summer with unemployment benefits.
Okay.
So historically, that has never been the case, but they haven't really came out and said clearly what the determination on that is. So, but under the old rules that we lived under for years and years, I would still put the furlough as about a $1 to $1.2 million cost savings. And again, I think there's a significant number of aides, if we can get the state to cut all their unemployment checks in a timely manner, that are making more money furloughed. As odd as that seems and as hard as that decision was, I think it was the right decision today still, but I would put it around that $1 million, $2 million.
Okay. And the curriculum work, how much? I mean, we should be still working on curriculum because regardless, we're going to have curriculum. So what does that look like? You mentioned that they're not doing as much curriculum work. I find that
Well,
troubling.
part of teacher hourly too is also supervision during the school day. So I think a lot of that savings might be tied more to the supervision within the school day than actual curriculum work. I don't know what TNL's position on curriculum work is this summer. I'd have to ask them that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a 66% chance that there's going to be more curriculum work because if we go to full virtual or a hybrid, that'll be a total change especially for a year than a normal face-to-face year. So
I doubt it's idle.
right. Okay.
Substitutes were a big portion of that too, though, substitutes and.
That look like, how much are we talking for subs? I mean,
Oh, goodness. It was close to 400,000, if I remember right, looking at how much we pay per month in substitutes, and just ending in March, there's a significant amount of that money was for substitutes.
400 per month? Or for total?
For the total.
Right.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I was
I thought you said per month.
I'm sorry. If I said month, I apologize.
Multiply that.
Yeah,
out.
right. And then 400 for the busing, do you think?
The busing, 400 is just for the Fund 27 portion of
Okay,
it.
I gotcha.
The Fund 10 portion of it is,
Oh.
the
That's just
Fund 10 is more than
Yeah.
the,
I think we could come in around that $4 million mark. Not including
Barring
IB&R.
Right.
That's a whole nother topic that we have to talk about yet, but the health insurance reserves, because our health insurance reserves look great because no one's been going to the doctor for the last 4 months. So that's another piece of data that is
Oh,
an
yeah.
oddball rather than being a data point. So
Chances are that's going to come back and bite us, though.
it will.
that's
A lot of
We've-
undiagnosed issues.
we've reached out to our auditors and they said, we'll take that, because we emailed them. We said, there's 3 or 4 months of treatments that are still pent up, waiting to be completed. And they said that they recognize, I don't know if they know what they're going to do yet, but they'll take that into account, because otherwise we'd have to refund for expenses we know that are coming.
Right.
So there's all kinds of oddities. That's why it's hard to sit here and give a number,
Yeah,
because.
no, I just wanted a rough, I mean, we've had large surpluses before, and I think that if it's published that we have a $3 million surplus, I don't think it'll be explained very well in the paper. You know, I mean, they're not going to go into that detail, so the public's going to hear, we got 3 or 4 million extra bucks laying around is what it's going to, that's exactly what it's
Yeah,
going to be.
and I've talked to Sharon Thiede, and I had a brief conversation, and she said, you know, she's getting the feeling, you know, staff's concerned too about the budget. I think we're concerned about everything in our lives right about now, right? And sharing some financial, some of the stuff we're going to probably cover here in a minute with the staff, just to kind of, it's hard to talk school finance with people. It's not a language that many people understand, right? But just kind of walk through what our strategy is, why we're doing some of the things we're doing. It'll generate a lot of questions, but hopefully it'll calm a few nerves in that process. Because it is going to look weird. We're talking budget repair bills, but yet we finished this fiscal year super strong. Even I would, as an outsider, would look at that and go, I think we need to communicate to at least staff and get them at least up to a baseline of knowledge of what our strategy is.
Yeah, budget repair bill is kind of a misnomer.
Yeah. Not repairing our budget.
No, it's not.
more than
No,
likely.
yeah, right, for sure, for sure.
So the good news is we're going to end the fiscal year really good
Plus.
with all the headaches that might bring us.
So the other question I have related to the budget kind of is, what has been the utilization of the clinic?
Quite honestly,
Not
that's
to put you
gotten
on the
kind of
spot,
lost
but
in the.
I would have to think that's kind of,
You brought up
Us.
the clinic. I'll lightly touch on the topic. We are meeting with other providers tomorrow, actually, but I don't have their most recent numbers. And if I do, I don't remember what they were. Clinic's just kind of gotten pushed aside right now. We are proceeding and looking at options, though, I can tell you that.
And then the only other question I have, sorry, Mrs. White, is we will not take the hit on summer school until next fiscal year, really, because there would only be 2 weeks in this year, correct?
It's one of those weird things. We get so many revenue limit exemptions where if we have fewer kids this year, we kind of talked about it last year or last month, and it's backwards to what you think. Once you lose so many kids, these exemptions make you whole for a year, and then the fiscal impacts next year.
Right.
Or the
following year after the actual.
I think the bigger impact that summer school might generate is an aid impact and a levy impact because those kids are counted as we go. But I have T&L giving me tallying up our latest summer school enrollment to see how the virtual format's being accepted. You know, are parents tired of virtual? Is there virtual fatigue and they just want to break, or are they still looking to get some instructional assistance for their kids? So,
Mrs. Voigt, I'm sorry.
I have another question now because of that. What does the virtual summer school enrollment look like? I haven't heard any.
The last I saw was a head count. Initially, I saw we were at 1/3 of where we've been, but that was a week to go in enrollment, so people might be waiting a little longer to make that decision. And last we saw was a head count, and what Sherry and I need are how many minutes are those kids in, because then we equate them to full-time school year employee or students. So a head count really doesn't mean much to us. Is it the same classes? Is it a long class? Is it speed and strength, or is it calculus 4? Or it obviously takes a while to generate those numbers, so we'll have that next month.
And we know at the elementary level, they are less, the number of minutes are less per class than we would normally have during summer school, because the expectation of having a child in the summer sit in front of the computer that long to work on it is not good. And then just the one thing to remember on the impact of that is it is also spread out over 3 years, because our enrollment number is averaged over 3 years. So it's not an immediate hit the following year.
The disappointing thing is, if you look at our history, we've really built up summer school over the last few years. So hopefully, we're going to have a blip. I'm not going to say we're going to hit where we were, but I hope we don't lose momentum.
Right.
Where you're kind of rebuilding it all over again, because that'd be disappointing.
Ms. White.
My real question,
Oh, here we go.
before your
Here's what I've been
question
waiting
that
for.
got off the exit
I'm
angle.
not taking real questions.
We had talked about telehealth, and that sounds like that has been really a boom now during the COVID situation. Do we have any aspect of telehealth in our current offerings through the clinic?
They started rolling it out because of the COVID.
They did.
Some of the providers that we're looking at in terms of someone else to provide clinic-type services are leading with that, and I think they're more ahead of the game in that regard. But it is part of, I think, the future of healthcare in our clinic.
All right, any other questions? Thank you very much. All right, next up would be budget development.
I know my name's on there, but I'm going to turn it right over to Darren because he has the PowerPoint on this one, so I won't, I'll just go right into that.
Is there a lot of that, or questions?
Yeah, but this will be much more eloquent than my answers probably were, so. It's funny, I ran into Kurt
We have to
O'Brien
wait
earlier
for each
today.
slide.
Well, I might cut it short if
down a
I'm
little bit.
sitting here for 3 minutes before each slide. I had to laugh. Kurt O'Brien and I were talking, we ran into each other in the hallway, and we said, yeah, you know, because we were talking about the superintendent interviews and the nice presentations they did, and we were laughing that Kurt and I only do the type that have all this alpha narrative stuff on it. And tonight, I'm going to present you
Alpha narrative.
something that looks just like this. So I'm half engineer and half business person, apparently. But I thought it was important. We've talked about what our overall goals were, and we were just talking about it again, but just kind of visually map out some of the things that we're going to be trying to tackle and how the fiscal years are going to end and really get into. I think it's really important for the board to understand how this is going to look over the next few months and then the next 2 fiscal years. So, we're trying to. Obviously, the state, as we've talked about, is having probably a tax revenue issue. I haven't seen hard numbers lately, but they're obviously struggling. So I really look at the second bullet is we're trying to develop a plan that gets us through. We don't have much control at the end of this fiscal year. You know, the cost savings are going to be realized. We've made those decisions already, but it's really the next 2 fiscal years that I'm hoping to get us through and be whole, kind of where we stand now in terms of where we are with fund balance. I'm not looking to greatly increase fund balance, like I mentioned. I don't think these savings fit into the same category as previous savings because of how weird the fiscal year has been. So last month we talked about, and I know revenue limit conversations don't stick with you really long, but there is a scenario if the budget repair bill at the state level is a reduction of revenue per child on the revenue limit. Because of those exemptions, the real impact might not come to us until 21, 22. So we need to, in my mind, we're planning, and I've highlighted it. I'm trying to get us to 6/30 of 22, as I mentioned, in a fairly solid physical position. But the things that go on between now and then might be different than what we've seen in the past. The budget repair bill could also not look at revenue limit and could look at per pupil aid, and that would be an immediate impact. That's a calculation of whatever number they come up with, and that's what they would count by the number of kids you have that year. Very simple math. So the timing of the impact on our fiscal years could be a blend of the next 2. And again, they might not do anything. I don't know how they'll swing it financially, but the state could just take a huge pass on a budget repair bill because of elections and Lord knows whatever else. I just don't see how they can make that happen. So revenue and expenditures and the building up and likely expenditure of reserves are not likely to align in each fiscal year, as we were just talking about, meaning we could end up with a significant balance and then have 2 years of deficit spending. But the difference between that deficit spending and what you would normally consider deficit spending, it'll be part of a plan. It won't be because we hired 3 more teachers than we should have, or Tim and I did 1 too many projects or anything like that. It'll be part of an overall strategy. Under current legislation, we still have a structural deficit meaning if things were normal, of about $3 million. And that's mainly driven by the loss of resident enrollment and flat revenue while we take on health insurance increases and staff wage adjustments and those types of things. The impact of the state budget repair bill could add millions of dollars to any one of those years or be split between 2 years. But there's just so many questions that are unknown. What's the immediate impact of the COVID shutdown? How long will it take for the economy to recover? And what other fiscal pressures is the state of Wisconsin looking at? Because they deal with health insurance and staff wages and all the same cost structure items that we do. So we're going to try to, again, I'm not someone who sits here and runs 20 scenarios because I think that just generates confusion rather than clear vision. So I focus on the revenue limit and the pupil aid to give us the revenue side, and we can come up with the expense side pretty easily. Yes, they have more levers. So I'll just skip down to the last bullet on this page because we've talked about some of the impacts of the budget repair bill. So as we talk today, I'm not getting into the tax levy and rate issue yet. I'm strictly talking, can we pay our bills or not, all in from all sources. And then we can talk about that tax, potential tax impact. I can tell you that equalization aid, which allows us to calculate the final levy, is the hardest thing to predict in a normal year, much less in a year where we don't know. So this is the math for can we pay our bills? Revenue all sources minus expenses, pretty simple math. And this is all I'm trying to accomplish. What's our budget? What's our deficit position or surplus? Very easy math, but doesn't tackle the next equation, and that's where the total tax levy comes in. What's our revenue limit authority going to be? That could be changed in a budget repair bill. What's our level of state equalization aid or general aid going to be? That can be changed in a budget repair bill. So there's really no way. I will bring you a levy guesstimate next month and rate, but you need to know that the two variables in that math are, there's current legislation to get us through next year. I just don't think that's going to be what we're going to be looking at in October. So plan moving forward to get us out a couple of years, as we've talked about. District reserves, we've talked about saving as much as we can this year. Federal funding, we are getting a little more information. The larger of the two funding programs, the application period's in July? Will open in July. And then fiscal flexibility and giving you the options and a few cards to play as we head into the next couple of years. District reserves, as we already hit on this, student transportation, employee compensation, and then the payroll related to, for every dollar of salary you pay Social Security, you pay all the roll-ups. So that's part of it. There's some consumable savings, maybe some tuition savings, because maybe we didn't serve all kids as thoroughly because of virtual, those types of things. And there might be some operational savings, but there's also some loss of revenue that Sherry touched on that we're trying to hammer out as well. This is just a quick summary of for ESSER, is that what they call it? Our allocation is based off of your Title I allocation, 1.2 million, but then you have to provide some to the private schools, 6% of that, so we're just over $1.1 million of funds that can be used. We're earmarking those funds for things, the biggest piece, and I don't know the dollar amount yet, is doing things that are going to make people more comfortable coming back in fall. Hand soap dispensers and masks and all the things to kind of make it a better environment. So we're working through that, but there's a lot of flexibility. It could be additional technology in case we go all virtual. It could be 1,000 different things. So we have some timelines here, and we have a dollar amount that we think we're pretty confident of. And then there's another pool of dollars, but this is to be shared 4K through college. I'm not sure where we fare in that, so I'm not going to even guesstimate. It's a pool of 46 million. There's 400 and some school districts. I don't know how many college and universities and tech schools there are, but that money will get pretty quickly, I think. So, and we might do very well. I don't know.
I don't think so, but I saw a letter that the UW system wrote to the governor kind of pleading their case on why they should pretty much get the majority of that, so.
Yes.
Absolutely, it's not being funneled through DPI, it's his office has that money, and it will be his determination on how it gets used.
Fiscal flexibility. We certainly have contracts with service providers. One of those, we've been talking about payments beyond what's in the contract and where that goes or not. We've held off on those conversations until we find out where we're at. I also have down on here, and I think we talked about it last month, is hold off on staff wage adjustments until more information is known, whether that's July, that'd be fantastic, or October, and then set the wages at that time. I put this in yellow because when I first talked about this, everyone goes, Darren's freezing wages. That's not my purpose. We have under our current budget, under current legislation, budgeted for raises. I'm just buying time and flexibility, and I think the board needs to know where we're at before you can make that decision in any form or fashion. So if we do share some of these slides with staff, I do plan on stressing this point to them that it's just a safety precaution. And it's not in the history of school district employees, for those of you who've been around a while, sometimes people didn't get raises for 18 months back in the old days. So it's not a new phenomenon, but I don't want to send that message because that's not the intent at all. So what don't we know? And that's more of these than what we know. But instructional model, we don't know. Potential migration of students to virtual learning for fall, whether that's open enrollment kids or resident kids. Are people going to feel more comfortable in that platform? The staffing plan that goes along with number one and number two. One that have a lot of concern about, and what are the safety guidelines in place, is what's student transportation going to look like? Can I have 15 kids on a bus or 60? And if it's 15, we might be virtual because there's no way I can get the kids to school. You'd be busing day and night at that rate. So food service, I think that's one area that we actually, we're continuing to serve lunches and breakfast now. I think that's one area where we think we're all right, and that we've proven that they can do it in a virtual format or on site. And then additional safety measures, cost impact of, again, I think we have a funding source for those comfort things or things that will just make people more at ease coming back to our facilities. So we don't know all these answers, but we are working on different scenarios to try to cover all of them. So this is, and I purposely didn't put real numbers on the left-hand side, but this is how I see our fiscal year is ending. 1920, very positive, kind of a golden year, if you will. And then the next 2 years, if we do nothing, deficits, and you'll see the arrows. I picture those dollars being pushed into those next two fiscal years and ending up where we were at 18-19 on that blue line. That's a very simplistic vision of how I see it maybe happening. Maybe it all hits us in 2021, or maybe it's later in 21, 22, but I think this is a pretty probable look. We know the 1920 year, again, is going to be a very great financial statement. That's not our goal. And we didn't make it happen solely, but there's nothing we can do to stop that at this point.
I'd actually be happy if the gold equals the two reds.
They do in Excel right now.
Yeah,
And Ms. Strong.
I'm just thinking those reds are going to be a little bigger. And,
well-
and definitely different each of those years probably too.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we will, and I say it in a few slides, but I think I can wrap it up now. We will likely continue to, we have that $3 million structural deficit. And now maybe gold's golden enough to get us through the next 2 years, but when you're starting at that point, and I don't think we're going to have that kind of money left over to get us through 2 years. When you factor in we're going to have to be making budget decisions like we normally do through this, even with the surplus from 1920.
Are we getting any of those masks back that we donated out? About
I'd have to
Come for us
ask Joe Cook and the nurses, and I know Tim handed out some masks, but I don't know if we're getting kind of a donation, but we're not having problems getting masks right now. It's one of the few things that they seem to have caught up on demand. Talk about what your
We didn't, but I don't know what we didn't give up that many, but I don't know what the nurses did. I think we gave maybe 100 to the fire department initially because they couldn't get their order in fast enough when they had it initially. I don't know what everybody else gave up.
Yeah, I'd have to check with the nurses. I don't remember what they, or if everything they offered was even taken. I don't know the answer to that either.
I thought maybe it was Dr. Cook, but I thought we had given out like a lot for all of those tents that they were going to be putting up, all the extra places. Like we gave out a ton.
Yeah, I know I know we shared some, but I don't remember the quantity. So we can get an answer to that. And then lastly, we haven't touched on it, well, we touched on it briefly. In terms of the fiscal year and the IBNR, which is our claims payable, and we have to have reserves, again, our health claims have gone way down, so we're working with our auditors. That's kind of a wild card right now in terms of how our financials look in end. Any questions?
Wait,
Have we had any COVID claims? Any people within our insurance network that are struggling with hospitalization for that?
We've had a couple of COVID and very few, but I don't know if they're on our health plan or not, but overall, the number of COVID cases of district employees has been very, very low. And I have to segue a little way back, going back a couple agenda items. You know, we had that COVID issue at Les Paul with the construction, and it's funny, Findorf kept saying, well, we're learning how to do it based on what we're experiencing in Waukesha, and I said, well, we're kind of following you. So we've not had any breakout or, we shut down the construction site and cleaned it up, and knock on wood, we're doing all right. So I would say no, there hasn't been much COVID that we know of. Now, people could be getting treatments and we just don't.
probably are, because that's going to be the payout from the feds, how many cases you have. So my assumption is they are coding it as that. We're not doing tests at the clinic, are we? COVID
No.
tests? No, okay.
Last time I checked.
Yeah,
Not-
no.
Unless
I
we
know-
started this week or something, no.
I know in the CARES Act that you get paid, the states will get paid a certain amount of money for every COVID case.
Heard that too. So everyone's comfortable with how the fiscal year ends might look, and
This year. Guys got it all figured out, Darren.
it is maddening that I've never had a period, even going through Act 10, not that it's the same thing.
We're as comfortable as you are clear.
Yeah. But every topic has 3 subtopics. Nothing's yes, no anymore. So.
Good report. All righty, our next discussion, information item, is return to facility use date.
Yeah, we've gotten, trying to get to my, we've gotten several requests in Express Swims here. They're one of the people who are asking. Once the Supreme Court ruled, people started asking, well, can we get back into our facilities? And technically that question and the answer now comes from the board, essentially, is what the Supreme Court ruling provided. And there's two parts of this conversation in my mind. There's what happens before June 30th, because certainly after June 30th, there never was an order, so people can't say, well, this is because the order is not in place anymore. So I broke down the likely requesters into people who have a district-approved lease agreement, which would be Adult Day Services, Richardson, Express Swim, Blazers, baseball on the outside fields. So we have a standing agreement with them. And in talking with two of them, Adult Day Services and Express, I've included their safety protocols, and I think yours is in pencil too. It keeps evolving every.
Yeah.
So this is one of the latest versions. So they certainly have the protocol there. But I mentioned the groups that have asked, this is really kind of, I'm not comfortable making this call. The COVID adds a whole new layer of dispute or disagreement on how it should be handled and all that. So we're bringing it forward. The other groups we have are facility use requests just by smaller groups that don't have an established lease. They're going on our school with Jess and applying for a classroom or a gym. And then lastly, our teams, and they're working, we really don't have to talk about them tonight. They're working with WIAA and Classic 8 and all that, so nothing's happening there before July 1st. So really the first two groups are the ones that I thought we'd.
Are we hosting any churches still?
Yes.
I know we were at West.
Want to speak into the mic, Jess?
Yes, we still have one at Rose Glen.
Are they occupying the space?
Not at the moment. They were initially told not until July 1st.
Okay.
Yeah, we put everything pre-June 30th was a hard no to everybody. It was across the board.
Corey.
Yeah, thank you. I was contacted by Dr. Morgan Hom, regarding the Waukesha Express swim team. I think I reached out to Joe, so I'm very glad to see this on the agenda. He gave me some information that was he also copied me a letter from Lori Carlson, which I believe is right here. Okay. And
I'm up just in case you want to answer questions.
yeah, she gave me some information, provided some information from the CDC about transmission of COVID in pools, and also provided some information on your safety plan, which I believe is included here. I looked at it when it was presented a week or 2 weeks ago, and I looked at it again today. So I haven't seen any changes in the CDC's finding that COVID is not transmittable, and I haven't seen any change in their recommendations or guidelines regarding distancing. And there was another Wisconsin Economic Development Forum that had a plan involved. So it seems to be well-researched. I was glad to see, I think it's the recommendation that suggested timeline is immediate, as soon as facilities are open.
With these leased agreements, we're comfortable with letting them into the buildings now.
Okay. And regarding the other issues, not just Waukesha Extreme or Waukesha Express swim team, the other ballparks in the city, they're being used. The pickleball courts are open. Things are getting used. So I'd love to see the facilities of our school district who are just sitting empty be used. I don't know if you have any updates more than what I.
Red light's on.
We have not made any changes to the information that we provided you. What we have seen is there are other swim teams that are already in the water training, swimming. They actually started out at 1 swimmer per lane that has progressed already to 2 swimmers per lane. We have a group of our older swimmers that have been training at a different facility. And 2 swimmers per lane is very manageable and safe, and the kids can social distance, and we can all feel like we're still able to provide our services, but doing it in a good way right now, given the circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that, the plan that Lori did the lion's share on it, that plan was, we spent a lot of time talking with the County Health Department, USA Swimming and their recommendations, American Swimming Coaches Association, the different facility managers around that currently have facilities open, coaches that are attending facilities. We've been at 3 different facilities with our kids to kind of see how they work, and we've been to Walter Schrader Aquatic Center in Brown Deer the last 2 weeks. They've got 9 teams that are coming through there at 36 kids an hour, and we've been down to Frank Brown Park in Panama City Beach. They've had their facility open, and we've been to Gainesville for the Y there. So we're going to be at Hartford tomorrow. So a lot of people are doing it. I think our kids, and we wouldn't, obviously safety is the most important thing, and we wouldn't put our kids or our coaches at risk if we didn't think that we've had the experience seeing how all this has worked, and if we didn't feel we could facilitate, coming back into the facilities. I believe that the pools are kind of a different animal with, being able to enter them from external doors and not having to go into the building. Starting at north and west, where, if we stick to the 2 swimmer per lane, we're talking 12 kids and 2 or 3 coaches in the facility at a time. So it's smaller numbers. That would give us time before South is done and see how all that's went before we jump into, there are 11 lanes at South, so you could have, in theory, 30 some kids at a shot there. So
One other thing to add with the leases that I forgot to mention is if you look at these leases, they're all pretty, Richardson has its own building. They're not commingling with students. Adult Day Services is at White Rock campus, but they have an isolated space. Certainly Express is in the pools, which is kind of a stand. And then the Blazer baseball teams obviously reserved an outdoor facility or field, and they're maintaining all the same safety guidelines.
The way we have the practices set up is it allows for us to control the flow of traffic as well. We're not going to just have, in the past we had kids coming and going all the time. So rather than do that, the protocol is that, we open the doors for a 5-minute period to let kids come in, they swim, and then we open the doors to have them leave. And so it's very controlled, and, that's all explained in our operating procedures, but I think we've covered all of our bases trying to minimize those touch points so that, the areas outside of the pool are clean. We know that around the pool deck and right in the water, the chlorine neutralizes the virus, or at least that's what the studies show.
What are the locker rooms?
So we wouldn't use the locker rooms.
No access to the locker rooms. Okay. Kids come in with their suits under their clothes. Okay. We make sure that we've got an employee wellness questionnaire that all of our employees have to answer before they come to practice to make sure that they haven't had any contact or any symptoms. And then, we social distance them outside of the building, bring them in. There'll be an area where that'll be social distance where they change with their bags. They go behind their lanes. We assign them to lanes. They get out, put their mask back on, go to a different area, change, and then out the building. We are also, in the last 2 weeks, we're taking temperatures before they go in the facility as well. So trying to cover all of our bases,
Yeah, for sure, you did a fantastic job on the plan. Does anybody have an issue with our facilities being brought back into the sphere of usage?
Not at all.
Mr. Como.
I don't have an issue. I think we need to start somewhere, and I think this is a good start with organizations such as yourself who've really put forth plans, some good excellent thought went into this. I was really happy to see when the Waukesha County Health Department came back and said, this is really an excellent plan. One of the jobs for us that's really difficult is we get information from the federal government, from the state government, from the local governmental entities, and it doesn't necessarily always align, and you get some mixed messaging. So ultimately what it's going to come down to is to each local entity deciding how best to get back to normalcy. And I think that this is a reasonable, Darren, I appreciated how you divide up into the three kind of different groups here on the summary page. I think you've spent an incredible amount of time getting ready for this, and you put a great amount of thought into it, and I hope it works. And I'm very open to this and having your swimmers get back in the pool and see what happens. And we're going to know, right? So as we slowly open things up, we're going to be looking at this a couple weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. Well, are all the swimmers coming down with it? You know, we're gonna have our own, I guess, local data, if you wish, and we'll be looking. We'll have to be looking at that. So we have to start somewhere. This board obviously has decided this week to start coming back with, to our in-person meetings. We have this meeting and then the full school board meeting for this week, and we're going to kind of see how things go. I think I'm going to leave it up to my committee chairs to decide what they're comfortable with. So it's not going to be like one order fits all, if you wish. And we're just going to have to keep being flexible and adjusting and testing and measuring. And I think this is a good start, and I feel comfortable with this.
Franchek.
Thank you. And just piggybacking off of Mr. Como, it comes down from the federal government, the state, the local, but then it also comes down to the parents. Do they want their kids involved in sports again? Do they want to get them out of the house? But I know you guys are so structured and very adequate, as you can see. And with the chlorine, I think that's a great place to start. And so, as you said, Joe, we just need to get things going and giving parents the option. If they don't want their kids in there, that's up to them. Completely fine. But you're making it available for the parents that are ready to say, okay, let's try something. And it's a safe place.
And we sent out surveys to all of our families, and just to kind of get a feel for their readiness to return to the pool. And, they're kind of all over the place, but the majority of the people are ready to come back, especially our more experienced swimmers. Their parents feel comfortable that they're able to step into this situation and listen to our instruction and adapt to the changes that we're requiring.
And I think it's been good that we've had that opportunity at Walter Schrader Aquatic Center, so the kids know the process and the coaches know the process, and it's been pretty smooth, and with the number of teams that are running through there.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it sets a great example for the students and the kids involved in these activities of how do you problem solve? This is a huge deal for them. I have kids who are involved in athletics, and they have this, seemingly insurmountable obstacle to what they enjoy the most. And then the coaches and the advisors get involved and say, look, nothing's insurmountable in theory. Here's a plan, or here's a problem, here's a plan, do the research, contact whoever is in charge of fixing it and fix it. So, yeah, I commend you on the effort you put into it. So, you're going to see the benefits hopefully pretty soon.
Objections, Mrs. Voigt?
I was going to say, this is an action item. It's just a matter of discussion. So,
Yeah, we're just voicing any sort
concerns.
of reservations.
I guess my only one would be, what liability do we have? If someone does, if we do have an outbreak of COVID because of this opening, what liability does the school district have in that context?
Check with M3, they said we just have to be listed as an additional insurance.
Darren? Put the,
EMC said no,
Right.
that we were good as long as we were listed as an additional insured, which we have been, especially with Express, always are. Did I miss any?
I think as long as we're not running the program.
And that's why we're asking for their safety protocol and.
So how does this work? Who makes the decision, or is it already made?
It's a discussion item here, and are we planning on talking about it?
it's a
when-
discussion item at the full board. We don't have any action plan, but we can give direction to our administration. And really, I think what Darren is asking right now is just we're just kind of getting a feel for, is it an okay process to start to group things together? We're just talking about group number one here at this time. We would be looking at immediately opening up our facilities. And so there are some issues where we give guidance to administration. And this is one where we're just providing guidance. We're not looking to have like a formal plan for like the whole district reopening. At our Wednesday meeting, we're going to be talking more broadly on reopening and like what does the fall look like, so on and so forth, where this discussion is kind of narrowed just down to putting our toe in the water for a few organizations right now. So administration can, work with these organizations to move forward on this. So we chose not to have it as an approval item, but just we'll give guidance to administration. Let's see where that discussion goes. If that discussion's favorable here, administration has their guidance then.
All right.
And also, the board never made a decision at the front end of this. It was
Right.
The vehicle that made the decision for us is gone, so there's really nothing to stop us from moving ahead, so that's why we didn't make it an action item.
Right.
Thank you.
This committee has purview over utilization of the facilities.
Thank you.
Good
Any
question.
other
Good question.
concerns? I have no concerns. I think it's fantastic that we're letting you back in. You have limited use though, because we have some of the pools are down, right? Or what does that look
South will not be available till right after the 4th.
The other two are available now.
like? They are available now.
Yep.
Are they heated or is it still going to be cold?
Ready to go.
Alrighty. Beyond that, if there's no other concerns, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you,
luck.
appreciate it.
I think there's a number of swimmers that are cheering at home.
And their parents.
It's the only meeting they've ever watched.
Right, exactly.
Our viewership went from
All right,
0 to 10.
have a great night. All right, next on the agenda is other business, recommendations for future committee meetings. So one recommendation would probably be the clinic, but that's probably already on your. Another recommendation is the fiber optic agreement. There's some confusion over the city offering New Berlin some of the access on there. And I know it has already happened, so I'd like to find out what's going on there because we're definitely involved. And I don't know if we have been consulted yet.
I have not, but I'll be talking to Steve in our
Okay,
weekly.
okay, because I heard from one of the board members at the Water Commission that it's a done deal. So, and I think those are our lines, right? We own them, right?
The,
I think
We
it's
own the
shared.
lines
I
and
thought it was
we-
shared.
it's a
wasn't
kind of a
I think that we own the
partnership.
lease though on the poles, right?
I'm not gonna, that's the Steve Schloman. We'll have to bring
Yeah,
Steve in.
we'll
as
have
a-
to find out because that's, that was part of the agreement.
2004? We got to go back to the
Yeah, we got to
original.
go back to the original agreement. That's
I think
exactly right.
it was 2004-ish.
And I think it's tapped into the cable thing or something. Franchise agreements or something weird like that too.
It's complex. It's
Yep.
not,
So that would be another thing. I'd like to know what's going on.